Star Wars Battlefront 2 is one of the most interesting games of all time. Not only is it a poster child of video game controversies that changed the industry as we know it, but it's also a poster child for video game comebacks. DICE's Battlefront 2 released in November of 2017, and it's a game with one of the most insane stories a video game has ever had. It went from being one of the most anticipated games of its year to being one of the biggest disasters in history, with players outright leaving the game in their wake due to its abysmal launch riddled with pay-to-win controversy. But then it went on a journey of redemption over the course of multiple years and ended up being a game that people absolutely loved. So much so they even petitioned for its return after its live service was abruptly cut off. Featuring in-depth multiplayer and a short campaign, Battlefront 2 is still active to this day despite being abandoned by EA and DICE over 4 years ago. And when I created this channel, I knew that one day I would dive into this game and revisit its controversy, its redemption, and all things in between, and just see where Battlefront 2 is today in 2024. We'll take a look at the controversy, the redemption, the multiplayer, and the campaign as we take a trip down memory lane as we revisit the notorious Star Wars Battlefront 2. But just before we do, today we have partnered with NordVPN. Now, I've been using NordVPN for about 2 years now because as a YouTuber, privacy online is something that I have to take very seriously. And NordVPN definitely has my back as the fastest VPN on the planet. With just a click, you can protect yourself online and stay safe from malware, as any file you access online can harbor all kinds of nasty viruses, trojans, and more. Nord's threat protection scans files as they're being downloaded for malware and will warn you if there are any issues. Now, last year I traveled quite a bit. I went to Indonesia and the US, and there were a lot of websites that I simply couldn't access in those countries that I would normally be able to access here in Australia. But with NordVPN, in just a couple clicks, I was back in Australia despite being on the other side of the planet, and I could access virtually anything I wanted. Now, using my link in the description and the pinned comment, you can get NordVPN for yourself. Every purchase of the 2-year plan will receive 4 bonus months on top. This includes all plans, standard, plus, and complete. And if you use my link, which you'll see on screen here, you'll get an exclusive deal that you can only get through content creators. This will land you an extra 4 months on top of what you already get. This is the best deal that NordVPN have currently, so don't miss out. And there is a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you literally have nothing to lose and everything to gain. So of course, make sure you check those links below, and a big thank you to NordVPN for partnering with us. The Star Wars Battlefront name has been a massive deal for Star Wars fans since the mid-2000s with the release of the original Battlefront and Battlefront 2. Those games are iconic in every sense of the word. So in 2015, when Star Wars Battlefront launched, coming from Swedish developers DICE, most notably known for the Battlefield franchise, people were hyped. Battlefront was back, and The Force Awakens was coming out in theaters around that time, and Star Wars fever was just everywhere. But DICE's first attempt in the Battlefront franchise was lackluster. Whilst visually incredible, the game was severely lacking in content. And the only way you'd get more is if you'd pay for the 4 DLCs, which would drop in the years following. There was also no campaign to speak of, which was a notable omission considering the original Battlefront 2 campaign was beloved by many. But out of nowhere, a leak came out that DICE were working on a sequel, and that sequel was Battlefront 2, which would launch in November of 2017. Now, one of the biggest complaints about DICE's first Battlefront was its lack of content, with only the original trilogy in the game with no prequel content unlike the original games. But Battlefront 2 was going to change that, featuring content from all 3 eras. It looked like Battlefront 2 was going to be the one. The ultimate Battlefront game, delivering all eras of Star Wars, more content than we knew what to do with, and a fully fledged campaign. And to be fair, it kind of did deliver on that front, but there was one big problem. Battlefront 2, as I'm sure most of you know, was the center of pay-to-win controversy for the industry, with larger questions being asked over the ethics of microtransactions in video games. It got so big and so bad to the point where governments got involved. It was truly a shit show in every sense of the word. Battlefront 2 was designed from the ground up with pay to win in mind. It would take players 40 hours to organically unlock Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader unless you caved and put money into the game. The entire progression system was designed in a way where the person with the biggest wallet simply dominated the lobby. It was clear that this just couldn't stand. And in order to save face, DICE got to work and rebuilt the progression system over the next 6 months. And around the midway point of 2018, Battlefront 2 started to show signs of redeeming itself. Following alongside the movies, the solo DLC dropped, which brought new maps, skins, weapons, and more into the game. And the following months would help Battlefront 2 slowly build up into becoming a game that was unrecognizable from its disastrous launch counterpart. New game modes were added, the game was just generally getting bigger and bigger, but then a massive announcement came for the game. They would be diving into the Clone Wars, bringing heroes such as Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anakin Skywalker, General Grievous, and Count Dooku to the game. Alongside them would feature massive new maps on planets like Geonosis, and even Felucia was added later on. This was the moment that really got Battlefront 2 off the canvas and allowed it to evolve into the game that it would become. The best era for a Battlefront game is undeniably the Clone Wars, and through a series of updates, the game started to resemble what it should have always been. Massive online battles where you could play as some of your favorite heroes and villains, even pulling obscure content out of deeper Star Wars lore for players to enjoy on a grand scale. Battlefront 2 was truly evolving into something that was genuinely special. It was clear that DICE had really figured out for themselves what players wanted out of this franchise, and leading into the release of The Rise of Skywalker in 2019, Battlefront 2 would become more popular than it had ever been away from its launch controversy. A celebration edition of the game was released, sort of symbolizing the game that Battlefront 2 had now become with the controversies in the past, and it seemed to work. Battlefront 2 was absolutely thriving, and then a major update dropped for The Rise of Skywalker, adding new maps, reinforcements, skins, and even heroes. It became clear that Battlefront 2 by this point had truly redeemed itself. That disastrous launch controversy was a thing of the past. The game in front of people at this time simply just was not that game anymore. 2 years on from its launch, Battlefront 2 was the game that it should have always been. But the most exciting thing was, players and developers assumed that this would now be the launchpad of the game's next chapter. It was time for Battlefront 2 to go to that next level, to soar to new heights and become the Battlefront to end all Battlefronts. But then it all changed. Going into 2020, updates were slow, players were confused, the game had just seen a massive peak, word of mouth surrounding the game was good again, but things were slow. Some players even started to get worried that EA might be pulling the plug on the game. But most people just scoffed at that idea, as that would just be ridiculous. To endure through a massive redemption arc, to hit its peak, have more players than ever, and then to abandon it would just be crazy. Except that is exactly what happened. Not long after COVID took over in April 2020, DICE released a trailer for what they labeled their final update. EA had officially pulled the plug on Battlefront 2 in its prime, which left this newfound player base for the game sitting there wondering what they just walked into. December 2019 saw the biggest player jump for Battlefront 2 yet, and then a few months later, EA killed the game in favor of shifting DICE's developers over to Battlefield 2042, which everybody said was a terrible decision back then, and that only became true once the game came out and ended up being a complete disaster. Battlefront 2 died, so Battlefield 2042 could be a disaster. It is a tragedy in every sense of the word. But Battlefront 2's players weren't going to let it go that easy. Everybody saw this decision as a complete and utter throw from EA. Even developers were understandably devastated, to the point where many of Battlefront 2's developers straight up left DICE after this happened. Some of those developers even came out and said that they had plans for heroes like Ahsoka Tano and Asajj Ventress, and also they were planning to add planets like Mustafar to the game. Which, definitely didn't rub salt into the wounds at all. This is fine. So given the ludicrousy of the situation, fans petitioned to reinstate the game's live service, which did pass 100,000 signatures. That petition would later evolve into a Battlefront 3 petition when people finally accepted that this game was truly done for. Star Wars fans were in denial over this game's cancellation for a long time because it was just such a stupid decision. Reliable industry insiders then made it known that DICE did pitch a Battlefront 3 to EA. But EA, in all of their wisdom, said no because they didn't want to cough up the 20% licensing fee to Lucasfilm. despite the fact the game would have made them way more money than any of their Battlefield titles to more than make up for that 20%. But EA weren't exactly in the business of good decision making around this time, to put it lightly. So Battlefront 2 was truly over, and the franchise still 4 years on hasn't received any hope for another game, which means that there are still a lot of people playing Battlefront 2 to this day. So without question, the star of Battlefront 2 is the multiplayer. This is what everyone plays these games for. As it stands 4 years on from the game's cancellation, nobody seems to have caught on how popular a new multiplayer Star Wars game could be, despite the fact both Battlefront games sold extremely well despite having bad launches. Therefore, players are still playing this long abandoned game in 2024. Now, I hadn't really put any substantial time into Battlefront 2 for a couple years until this video, so I was interested to jump back onto the servers and see where things are at. And I've got to say, it's definitely a mixed bag. But what I was surprised by was just how much is here. I kind of forgot how much content Battlefront 2 had. It reminded me why this game was doing so well at its peak. The game features over 22 playable heroes and villains, 12 hero and villain ships, literally dozens upon dozens of playable reinforcements, everything from droidekas to Wookiees to ATSTs. I don't think I can really stress how many playable reinforcements there are in this game. The variety is insane. Depending on which era you're playing or what map dictates what reinforcements you can choose from. The prequel, original, and sequel era all have strong spreads of reinforcements, and they're still a lot of fun to play. But let's highlight the heroes. As stated, the game features 22 heroes and villains from all eras of Star Wars. When it comes to Battlefront, the heroes are what helps separate the game from the likes of other shooters like Battlefield. And the heroes are handled incredibly well in this game. They're powerful, and in the right hands, you can absolutely dominate with them. But they're not powerful enough that you can just mindlessly dominate a lobby without actually thinking about your engagements first and having a little bit of skill. DICE struck a really good balance of making heroes and villains powerful, but not invincible. Now, these heroes are still a lot of fun to play. The blaster heroes are obviously the ones that people don't tend to go for as much, as we all want to play with the lightsaber heroes. And this is where Battlefront 2 shines, running around as Darth Maul with Duel of the Fates playing in the background as you run headfirst into a Clone Wars battle, or Anakin as Battle of the Heroes plays, running around on era-specific maps with these heroes, with the music, the voice lines, the incredible sound design. This is the magic of Battlefront 2 right here. Throwing yourself into these massive battles with these iconic characters and just losing yourself in the immersive nature the game provides. Now, the hero versus hero gameplay isn't anything overly impressive. With such a wide range of abilities, it can make for some cool encounters, but there's a lot of teleporting and dodgy hit registration going on that can make the game pretty frustrating. Granted, some of that is down to ping issues, as if you live anywhere that isn't in the US or Germany, you're probably going to have to hop to different servers across the world. Of course, if you go on the servers in 2024, you're probably going to come across max level sweatlords who haven't stopped playing since launch, so be prepared for that. And if you're on PC, I keep hearing that hackers are all over the place, but I didn't come across any in my playtime for this video. But when things are working as intended, Battlefront 2's heroes are still the star of the show. Each of them feature tons of skins to work toward, and most of the skins are actually really great. Obviously, they only really scratched the surface, and there was potential for so much more, but the modding community has your back on that. There is a modding community that has kept the game alive for a while on PC, but it seems it's starting to fizzle out a little bit. Plus, I could not get mods working because the EA launcher for this game on PC is complete dog water. But let's shift focus to the game modes. Battlefront 2 consists of Supremacy, Galactic Assault, Heroes vs Villains, Hero Showdown, Blast, Strike, Extraction, Ewok Hunt, Starfighter Assault, Hero Starfighters Co-op, and Instant Action. Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Playing on PC, I spent a lot of time in the menus across various servers around the world trying to find games in some of the smaller game modes. The player base has definitely centralized in a handful of modes and kind of left the rest to die, to the point where I only found one Starfighter game mode across 2 weeks of searching across various servers at different times. Again, this was on PC. On console, your experience may vary. But from what I can gather, the Starfighter modes are basically dead overall. It's a shame because the Starfighter modes in Battlefront 2, I think were massively underrated. Now, the main game modes you can actually expect to find full lobbies of in 2024 would be Supremacy, Galactic Assault, and Heroes vs. Villains. These are the main three that summarize the Battlefront 2 experience today, and to be fair, they are probably the three best modes, so this isn't really a bad thing. Supremacy was DICE's attempt at recapturing the magic of the iconic galactic conquest from the OG Battlefront games, which it certainly doesn't, but it's still a really good mode that I would recommend sticking to the Clone Wars for. It's the best big battle Clone Wars style game mode you'll get in this game specifically, and it's not hard to find games. You start on a ground phase, you capture control areas, and then progress to another phase on a capital ship to infiltrate and take it down or defend it. This is a great mode that definitely has you feeling like you're smack bang in the middle of the Clone Wars. The heroes and reinforcements are also error locked here, which adds to the immersion, so you won't have Luke Skywalker running around on Kamino or anything like that. It's definitely a more purist and immersive experience. Galactic Assault is kind of the opposite. It's basically the everything goes large scale mode. The maps have a 3-lane design, all heroes can be chosen despite the map you're on, and this was the flagship mode of Battlefront 2 at launch. There's also Heroes vs. Villains, and it does what it says on the tin. It's a 4v4 hero and villain battle, and it's probably my favorite mode of the entire game, to be honest. It's easy to find games, it's fun to have heroes just duke it out, and there are some great voice line interactions between characters. As for the other smaller game modes, you can sometimes find games of Hero Showdown because it does have a low amount of required players, but this is where you'll more than likely run into sweatlords who have not stopped playing since the start of the game. Co-op is technically online as you have online teammates, but these are mainly bot lobbies. Granted, they are still fun. I also did manage to find a game of Blast and Strike, but the lobbies were nowhere near full, so it was kind of a waste of time. Ewok Hunt, same deal. It's fun, it's goofy, but it's pretty dead. There's also Instant Action, which is an offline game mode where you can customize battles how you want them. You can definitely find a lot of value here too. I certainly did. But let's shift to one of the highlights of Battlefront 2, the maps. The maps in this game are incredible. This game came out in 2017, and I still think the visuals on these maps not only hold up, but are still impressive by today's standards. Now, it's hard to say exactly how many maps are specifically in the game, as depending on the game mode, some maps are exclusive to those, and others are smaller areas isolated from larger maps in other modes, so it's a bit of a mess. But for variety's sake, it's a good mess. Now, you of course have planets from the prequels such as Kashyyyk, Naboo, Geonosis, and Felucia. From the original trilogy, you have Hoth, Yavin 4, Tatooine, Endor, Death Star 2, Bespin, and from the sequels, you have Krayt, Starkiller Base, Ajan Kloss, Takodana, and Jakku. And then you also have other planets from the in-between periods, such as Kessel from Solo, Scarif from Rogue One, but also for the Starfighter modes, there's Ryloth, Unknown Regions, Dakar, and Fondor. And then there's also campaign-exclusive planets like Pilio, Vardos, Sullus, and Athula. So yeah, safe to say there is a lot here, and there's something for everyone. I still to this day am extremely impressed by the details of these maps. Yes, they are kind of just the area for the conflict, but if you stop and take a look around, the detail is crazy and it does not get enough attention. Paired with this game's impeccable sound design, which I cannot stress enough, the sound in this game is phenomenal. These maps are amongst the most immersive Star Wars environments I've seen yet. Change your view to first person and slowly walk around these maps and just take it all in. You won't be disappointed. Whether it's the rainy storms of Kamino to the bustling streets of Mos Eisley, these worlds feel so alive and vibrant. It's honestly really impressive. But let's move on to the gameplay and progression. So as stated earlier in the video, DICE had to essentially rebuild the progression system, ditching the pay-to-win loot box mechanics and ridiculous grinds. Trading all that in for a skill point system which is used by leveling up characters to upgrade their star cards to become more powerful. Although it can still be grindy, it's the good type of grind. You can try various star card combinations which genuinely do affect the hero and can accommodate your playstyle. And the same goes for reinforcement classes and basic infantry classes. Now, playing in third person is the best way to play the game for a gameplay edge, but first person is great for sniping, and as I touched on earlier, it is way more immersive. Now, heroes and reinforcements are locked to third person, however, and each of them play different enough for it to not get stale. Death Troopers obviously feel very different from Ewoks. There's strong variety with the likes of droidicas, and of course, there's your typical flame troopers and rocket troopers. Like, the reinforcement side of this game is like a whole other game in of itself. And DICE did a great job pulling from outside the mainline films to get some of these characters in the game, and they certainly don't disappoint, and they add a lot to the gameplay. Now, the gameplay of Battlefront 2 in general is fairly arcadey, which I think suits this game well. It's more of a casual shooter, which I think is exactly what a game like this needs. We're not really here playing Battlefront 2 for top-of-the-line core gameplay mechanics. It just has to be good enough for it to be fun so we can enjoy these worlds with the characters we love. And Battlefront 2 more than delivers on that front, and it's a major reason as to why this game became so beloved. So although the multiplayer is about what you expect from a game that's been abandoned for 4 years, there's still a ton of fun to be had. And with no sequel on the horizon or any form of multiplayer replacement, it looks like Battlefront 2 servers might stay active for years to come. The campaign for Battlefront 2 has always been something that was kind of a thing when the game came out, but then nobody really talked about it again. Personally, that checks out, as I played the campaign when the game came out in 2017, and I hadn't played it again until this video. The Battlefront 2 campaign centered around an Imperial Special Forces squad called Inferno Squad, led by our main character Iden Versio, as well as Del Meeko and Gideon Hask. It ran alongside Return of the Jedi, specifically the Battle of Endor, and post Return of the Jedi, and then led up to just before The Force Awakens. Now, although the campaign was a highly anticipated aspect of Battlefront 2 when it was being marketed, the campaign is extremely short. It took me just over 5 hours to finish, which included the Resurrection DLC, which I believe was added after the launch of the game. So it's not a long story by any stretch of the imagination. Nor is it inherently profound. And you guys know I love diving stupidly deep into the single player stories on this channel, but unfortunately, what you get in this campaign, you really can't do that. Now, not to say this campaign doesn't have its moments, there are some really fun characters here, and it does get surprisingly good in some areas. When we're playing through the perspective of Imperial Special Force members, we're on the side of the bad guys, and there are times where the story does let us know that these people aren't just mindless Imperial drones. They're well aware of the flaws of the Empire and question the fight themselves. So although some of these moments, like the one with Del and Luke, I would consider to be really good, unfortunately, Iden's turn from Imperial Special Forces member to Rebellion fighter is not only predictable, but abrupt to the point where it makes you question the entire story. Due to the fact this campaign is extremely short, you only get a brief period of time where you're actually playing from the perspective of the Empire, and it's these moments where the campaign is at its best. When we're fighting the rebels on Endor and look into the sky to see the second Death Star's destruction. Seeing how the Imperials were dealing with that at the time is honestly fascinating, and this is why telling a story from the point of view of the Imperials is great. But as the Emperor has some plans for the galaxy from beyond the grave that include destroying Iden's homeworld, Iden switches sides within like 2 hours of the campaign, and we're now on the side of the rebels, and now it's just a generic story that you'd come to expect. Now, I'm not saying she doesn't have probable cause to defect, but it's how quick it happens into the story that is just disappointing. It leaves the campaign's unique premise in its wake 2 hours in, and then you're kind of just left to slog out generic missions for the rest of the campaign, and it's honestly disappointing. Now, considering only 2 of the 3 members of Inferno Squad defect, with Hask remaining loyal to the Empire, it brings about conflict toward the end that we don't really get to see. You could argue the main antagonist of the campaign is Hask, but you don't really see him after Iden defects until the Resurrection DLC that takes place almost 2 decades later. Iden's father is also played off as an antagonist, as he remains loyal to the Empire and the Emperor's beyond the grave plans of Project Cinder, but he remains severely underdeveloped to the point where his death has virtually no impact at all. I feel like this campaign was just a waste of potential, to be honest. I would have much rather it was significantly longer with more time spent on the Imperial side of things, fleshing the characters out more, so when they do switch sides, it's actually more impactful. Not to mention it would add more weight to some of the better scenes like where Hask kills Dell. Like, this was good, but it could have been so much better. The Resurrection DLC, which ends this story, is in a similar situation. Some cool character moments that could have just been so much better. This campaign truly suffers from it being a campaign in a game that's also tackling multiplayer. It's clear this campaign didn't get the full focus the concept probably deserved, and because of that, it was overall disappointing without being bad. So, Battlefront 2, revisiting it again in 2024 and going over its fall and rise and the controversies of its launch, definitely made me appreciate the game that we had here. It's a complete travesty that EA swung the axe on this game in order for Battlefield 2042 to flop, but that's the reality that we live in. With no hope on the horizon for a sequel or a reboot, unfortunately it seems like Battlefront 2 in its post-mortem state is what fans are going to have to flock to, and it definitely still has that magic that made it so popular, but every passing moment playing this game, you are instantly reminded of what could have been. Although Battlefront 2's story is one of redemption, it's also one of tragedy, making my experience with this game in 2024 extremely bittersweet.